The locked door. I needed a break. Between work stress and my personal life falling apart, I thought renting a cabin in the woods for a few days would help me clear my head. It was far from everything, a couple of hours outside the city, surrounded by nothing but trees and quiet. Just what I needed. The cabin was simple, nothing fancy, but it had the essentials. It felt peaceful when I first arrived, the kind of quiet that lets your thoughts finally calm down. After unpacking, I explored the place. That's when I noticed something strange. The bedroom door had a lock, but not on the inside. The lock was on the outside, like it was meant to keep someone in. It was weird, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it was for kids or something. Still, a small unease crept in. That night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a creak from somewhere in the house. Old cabins make noise, right? I ignored it, telling myself it was just the wood settling. But even though I managed to sleep, the thought of that lock lingered. The next morning felt off. I got up feeling groggy, even though I'd slept fine. As I was getting dressed, I noticed my shirt wasn't where I left it. It was draped over a chair instead of folded on the bed. Strange, but I chalked it up to being tired when I unpacked. Then, when I went to brush my teeth, the bathroom light was on. I could have sworn I turned it off the night before. The day was uneventful. I spent most of it walking around the nearby trails trying to clear my head. But when I got back to the cabin that evening, the feeling of unease returned. That night, the noises were louder. This time, it wasn't just creaks. I thought I heard something. No, someone, whispering outside my bedroom door. I froze in bed, listening intently, but the whispers faded. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, or maybe the wind playing tricks on me. But the lock on the door kept nagging at me, making it hard to brush off the feeling that something wasn't right. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. They were soft, just outside the door. My heart pounded as I lay there, too scared to move. After what felt like forever, I gathered the courage to get up and check. I flung the door open, but there was no one. Just the empty, dark hallway. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the isolation was getting to me. On the third night, things got worse. I was trying to fall asleep when I heard the whispering again. This time, it was clearer, right outside my door. I jumped out of bed and locked the door from the inside. The sound of footsteps followed, moving slowly, deliberately, as if someone was pacing just outside. My stomach twisted in knots. I stood there, trying to stay calm, but every instinct told me to run. The next morning, I found more things out of place. My bag had been unzipped, and a jacket I didn't own was draped over a chair in the living room. I felt like I was losing my mind. I considered leaving, but part of me thought it was all in my head, that I was just stressed out and overthinking everything. So, I stayed. I told myself I'd give it one more night. Big mistake. That night, it all came crashing down. I was lying in bed when I heard footsteps again, louder this time, followed by a faint scratching sound at the door. My pulse skyrocketed. I locked the door again and backed away. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. Then, out of nowhere, a note was slipped under the door. My blood ran cold as I bent down to pick it up. It said, "You're not alone." I went into full panic mode. I grabbed my bag and started throwing everything in, not caring about being neat. The scratching turned into banging. Someone was outside trying to get in. My hands shook as I zipped up my bag and grabbed my keys. I could hear footsteps, louder now, like whoever was outside was pacing back and forth, waiting for me to make a move. I had to get out. I flung open the door, heart racing, and sprinted down the hallway toward the front door. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. I didn't dare look back. The footsteps followed, fast and heavy, as I ran toward my car. Fumbling with my keys, I prayed the engine would start. When it did, I peeled out of there, driving down the narrow, dark road as fast as I could. The whole way home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, convinced I'd see someone, or something, following me. But the road behind me stayed empty. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment in the city. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that the isolation got to me. But then, little things started happening in my apartment. My keys wouldn't be where I left them. Doors I knew I had closed would be slightly open. I kept seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. My heart sank. It felt like I was back in that cabin, trapped, with something just on the other side. I got up to check, telling myself it was just paranoia. But when I opened the door, there was nothing. Nothing except a note on the floor, identical to the one from the cabin. It read, "You're not alone." I don't know if I'm being followed or if I'm losing my mind. Maybe writing this all down will help me make sense of it. But even as I type this, I still hear footsteps outside my door. I wasn't sure if I should share this, but I can't stop thinking about it. This happened a couple of weeks ago, and I still feel uneasy every time I'm in a parking lot. I know it sounds stupid, nothing really happened, but I can't shake the feeling that it could have. It was a Thursday night and I'd stayed late at work. I had a few errands to run, so I went to the mall. By the time I finished, the place was nearly empty. It was one of those nights where everything feels just a little off. The lights in the mall were dimming, and the only sound was the echo of my own footsteps. It was eerily quiet, and I couldn't help but feel like someone was watching me. I shook it off as paranoia and made my way toward the exit. When I got outside, I noticed that the parking lot was practically deserted. My car was parked under a broken light, a little farther away than I'd remembered. The empty rows of cars made me feel exposed, and a strange twinge of anxiety hit me. But I just wanted to get home, so I kept walking. That's when I saw the van. It was an old, beat-up white van parked way too close to my car, like right next to the driver's side. The lot was almost empty, so why park so close? My stomach dropped, and I slowed down, trying to think rationally. Maybe it was a coincidence, but my instincts screamed that something wasn't right. I stood there for a second, debating what to do. I noticed someone inside the van. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there. My heart started racing, and I fumbled with my keys. My mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario: kidnappings, assaults, human trafficking, those awful stories you always hear about but never think will happen to you. I thought about running back into the mall, but part of me didn't want to overreact. I didn't want to look paranoid or crazy. But then the door of the van opened. A man, middle-aged and scruffy, started to get out. The second he saw me, he stopped. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding in my chest, and everything in me screamed to get out of there. Without thinking, I turned and bolted back toward the mall entrance. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. My breath was ragged, and my chest was tight as I pushed through the glass doors and rushed to the security desk. The guard on duty was a young guy, probably in his early 20s, and he looked bored out of his mind. I could barely get the words out as I tried to explain what had happened. He gave me a skeptical look, but after some convincing, he agreed to walk with me back to the lot. Before we went out, he decided to check the security cameras to see what I was talking about. I felt a little embarrassed, like maybe I'd overreacted. But then, we saw the footage. The man had been sitting in the van for over an hour. He never went into the mall. At one point, he'd gotten out to mess with something under the hood, but that was it. It looked like he might have been having car trouble. For a second, I felt relieved. Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding. But then, the guard pointed out something strange. He wasn't trying to fix the van anymore, but he hadn't left either. He'd just been sitting there, watching the parking lot. My stomach twisted again. Something wasn't right. The guard offered to walk me back to my car, and I hesitated, but I agreed. As we approached the parking lot, the van was still there, but the man was gone. The guard made a weak joke about how maybe the guy got fed up and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. My eyes darted around, scanning the shadows. The van's door was slightly ajar. I felt my heart race again, and I clutched my keys tighter. The guard walked over to check the van. The interior was a mess, tools and junk everywhere. It looked like he really had been trying to fix something, but where was he now? A sudden surge of paranoia hit me. What if he was hiding, waiting for us to leave? Then, the guard's radio crackled. Another security officer said they'd spotted the man re-entering the mall on a different camera. My pulse quickened, and panic set in again. What if he was circling back to find me? The guard told me to get in my car and leave while he went back inside to investigate. I didn't need to be told twice. I jumped into my car and immediately locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the key into the ignition. I glanced around, half expecting the man to appear out of nowhere. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I sped out of the lot, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. Even as I drove, my heart wouldn't stop pounding. Every car behind me looked like that van. Every corner felt like a trap. But I made it home. That night, I locked every door and window in my house. I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the house made my skin crawl. I knew, logically, that he couldn't have followed me. But the fear was there, gnawing at me. The next day, I called mall security to ask if they found the guy. They told me they never did. The van had been towed, but nothing suspicious was inside. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. I still can't go back to that mall. I avoid parking lots whenever I can, and I still wonder, what if I hadn't run? The open door. It all started one quiet morning. My wife and I have been married for 2 years, no kids, both working regular jobs. We live in a nice, suburban neighborhood. Nothing ever happens here. It's the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked during the day, though I've always been more cautious. I lock everything at night, double-checking before bed. That morning, I was getting ready for work when I noticed something strange. The front door was wide open. I stood there for a second, just staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My wife was still upstairs, so I called out to her, asking if she had left the door open. She didn't. I know I locked it before we went to bed. It felt wrong, but we brushed it off. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe it was nothing. Still, that feeling of unease stuck with me. As I locked the door again, I remembered something odd from the night before. There had been this faint creak, like someone stepping on a floorboard, but I thought it was just the house settling. Now, I wasn't so sure. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night. The air felt colder than usual. I lay there for a moment, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The house was dead quiet, but I couldn't relax. I got up, walked down the hallway, and found the front door wide open again. I stood frozen for a moment, then shook my wife awake. "The door's open," I said, trying to stay calm, but she saw the fear in my eyes. We both went to check it out together, confirming that, yes, it was open, though neither of us could explain why. We double-checked the lock, made sure everything was secure, and went back to bed. But sleep didn't come easy. That week, it kept happening. Every few nights, we'd wake up to find the door open. I changed the lock, even put in a cheap alarm system, but it didn't help. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? Nothing had been stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry. I started feeling paranoid, checking the door, 5, 6 times before going to bed. My wife tried to comfort me, but she was starting to get frustrated. Maybe one of us is sleepwalking, she suggested, though we both knew that wasn't it. She was starting to get annoyed with my growing anxiety, but I couldn't help it. The thought that someone might be coming into our house at night was driving me crazy. I joked once that it felt like someone was watching us, but she didn't laugh. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a small security camera and set it up facing the front door. I was determined to catch whatever was going on. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe the lock was faulty. There had to be a rational explanation, but the camera didn't help. The door kept opening, but the footage showed nothing. Just an empty hallway, and the door slowly swinging open in the middle of the night. No one was there. That's when the fear really started to settle in. One night, after another sleepless evening, I was sitting on the couch, trying to make sense of everything. That's when I noticed something under the cushions, a small black object. I pulled it out, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a recording device. Someone had planted it in our house. I showed it to my wife, and she went pale. "Who would do this?" she whispered, but I didn't have an answer. We sat there in silence, trying to process it. My mind was racing. Someone had been listening to us. They'd been in our house. But for how long? And why? My wife tried to stay calm, saying we shouldn't jump to conclusions, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Someone was watching us. Someone knew everything. I started to wonder if maybe she knew more than she was letting on, but I pushed that thought away. That was just paranoia talking, wasn't it? We decided to stay with a friend for a few nights while we figured things out. We contacted the police, but with no forced entry and just a recording device, they didn't seem to take it seriously. I couldn't sleep. I was consumed by thoughts of who could have planted it. I started suspecting everyone, our neighbors, my co-workers, even my wife again. Nothing made sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. On the last night at our friend's house, I woke up again in the middle of the night, my heart pounding for no reason. I felt that same cold dread, like something was terribly wrong. I walked into the living room and there it was. The front door was wide open. My stomach dropped. This wasn't about the house. Someone was following us. I ran back to the bedroom, shaking my wife awake. "We need to leave, now." She looked at me, her face full of fear, but she didn't argue. As we scrambled to gather our things, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway. We both froze, holding our breath. The footsteps got louder, but no one appeared. We stood there, waiting for something, anything, to happen. We moved back home a few days later, but things weren't the same. We changed the locks again, installed more cameras, even talked to a private investigator, but nothing, no new incidents. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. My wife told me to stop obsessing, but we were both on edge. She started sleeping in the guest room. We barely spoke. Then, just when I thought I could finally move on, I found another recording device. This one was hidden in a drawer I hadn't checked before. I never found out who placed them or why the door kept opening. Eventually, I just stopped looking. It was driving me insane. Every few nights, the door still opens, but I don't check the cameras anymore. I don't want to know. I never thought anything like this could happen to me. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing really happens. I go to work, come home, and enjoy my evenings in peace. It's always felt safe here. My neighbors are friendly, though I don't talk to them much. Life has been predictable, maybe even a little boring. But recently, I've noticed some strange things. Small things at first, like hearing footsteps outside at night, or seeing someone out of the corner of my eye when I take out the trash. I brushed it off, thinking it was my imagination. Paranoia, maybe. But the feeling of being watched kept creeping up on me. Then last week, I got a notification about a package being delivered. The weird thing is, I hadn't ordered anything. I found a small, unmarked box sitting on my porch. There was no return address. I opened it, and all I found inside was a photo. A photo of me, standing outside my house. The creepy part? It was taken the day before. I recognized the outfit I was wearing. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just some kind of prank. Maybe a neighbor was playing a joke, or it was delivered to the wrong person, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I asked my neighbors, but none of them had seen anything. I even called the delivery company, but they had no record of the package. My rational mind kept trying to make sense of it, but my gut told me something was off. That night, I decided to check the doorbell camera footage. What I saw only made things worse. The footage showed someone dropping the package on my porch, but they stayed just out of view of the camera. I could see their shadowy figure moving around, deliberately hiding from the lens. Whoever it was, they knew what they were doing. A few days passed, and I tried to go on with life, but I couldn't shake the unease. Then, another package arrived. This time, there was no photo inside, just a note. It said, "We're watching." The handwriting was simple, blocky, giving no clue about who might have sent it. That's when I started to panic. I called the police, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. They said without a direct threat or evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. I felt completely helpless. Whoever was doing this knew exactly how to torment me without crossing the line into something actionable. I started noticing more things, little details I hadn't picked up on before. Things in my yard were moved, my trash cans weren't where I had left them, and unfamiliar cars were parked down the street. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like someone was watching me. My heart would race at the sound of every creak, every rustle of leaves. I confided in a friend, hoping for some reassurance, but she just told me to lock your doors and be careful. I felt more alone than ever. No one seemed to understand how serious this felt. That night, I woke up to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I got up and looked outside, but there was no one there. Just a smudged handprint on the glass. That's when I realized this wasn't just someone messing with me. This was real. I started thinking back over the last few weeks. How long had I felt like I was being watched? I'd ignored those small signs, but now I was connecting the dots. Whoever this was, they had been watching me for longer than I'd realized. I couldn't stand it anymore. I packed a small bag and decided to leave, maybe stay at a hotel for a few days to clear my head. As I was throwing clothes into my suitcase, my phone buzzed. It was a text message. Going somewhere? My blood ran cold. They knew. They were watching me right now. I rushed to my car, but before I could drive off, I thought to check under it. I don't know what made me think of it, but I'm glad I did. There, tucked under the wheel well, was a small tracking device. My stomach dropped. They'd been following my every move. I went back inside, completely shaken. There was no escaping this. I couldn't leave, but staying in the house felt just as dangerous. As I sat there, trying to think of what to do, another package arrived. This time, it was delivered right to my door, even though I hadn't left the house. I should have known better, but I opened it. Inside was a USB stick. My hands were trembling as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen flickered, and then video files appeared. My heart sank as I clicked on the first one. It was footage of me from inside my house. Every room, every angle, there I was, living my life, completely unaware I was being watched. I felt sick. They'd been inside my house. I searched the house from top to bottom, but of course, there was no one there. I sat down on the couch, too afraid to move. Even though I'd called the police again, I knew it was too late. They'd been watching me for weeks, maybe longer. I could feel it in my bones. There was nothing the police could do now. Just as I tried to calm myself, my phone buzzed again. Another text, this time just 2 words. Too late. I don't know what to do anymore. The police are on their way, but I'm sitting here in the dark, wondering if it even matters. Whoever this is, they're still out there, watching, waiting. How long have they been planning this? How much do they know? Will I ever feel safe again? I don't think I will. The party invitation. I'm not really one for parties. I work a regular 9 to 5 job, have a small group of friends, and I generally avoid anything that feels too social. So when I got an email from an old colleague, David, inviting me to an exclusive party, I wasn't sure how to respond. David and I hadn't spoken in years. He sort of disappeared from our group out of nowhere. To be honest, I didn't even think about him until the email showed up. The invitation was simple, too casual for someone who had been missing for so long. Hey, we're having this big party on Saturday. Would be cool if you could come. It's at a place outside the city. No details beyond that, just a date and an address. Something about it felt off, but I told myself it was just me being paranoid. After all, it's just a party, right? I should have trusted my gut. When Saturday rolled around, I found myself driving out to the address. It was in a remote area, far from the city, with no streetlights and barely any signs of life along the road. Eventually, I arrived at a large, old mansion that looked like something straight out of a movie. It wasn't in disrepair, but it had a certain creepiness to it, like it had seen better days. There were already a few cars parked outside, and as I walked up the long driveway, I could hear the faint sound of music and laughter from inside. The party seemed normal enough at first. People dressed in nice clothes, holding drinks, and chatting in small groups. But there was something weird about the vibe. The conversations felt forced, the laughter too loud, too fake. Everyone seemed like they were performing a role rather than enjoying themselves. I tried to find David, but no one knew where he was. After wandering around for a bit, a man approached me. He introduced himself as Gregory, the host of the party. His smile was unsettling, too wide, like he knew something I didn't. David couldn't make it, he said, leaning in close. But he insisted that you come in his place. That's when I felt the first real twinge of fear. I didn't know this guy, and suddenly the entire atmosphere felt even more off. I wanted to leave, but before I could make an excuse, Gregory said, "There are rules here. You can't leave early." His tone wasn't joking. I started to panic a bit, but I tried to stay calm. I mingled with the other guests, hoping to find a way out without making a scene. But every time I glanced toward the exit, I noticed 2 large men standing near the door, almost like guards. I hadn't noticed them before, but now they seemed to be watching me. That's when things got even weirder. As I made my way around the room, I started seeing things I couldn't explain. A woman sitting in the corner, quietly sobbing to herself, ignored by everyone else. A man standing by a window, staring blankly into the darkness outside, like he wasn't really there. The more I looked, the more I realized something was terribly wrong with this place. Everyone seemed off. I tried to text a friend, but my phone had no signal. I told myself it was just because we were in a remote area, but deep down I knew something was wrong. The exits were all blocked or locked, and every hallway I turned down seemed to lead me deeper into the mansion. The panic I had been holding down began to rise. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out. But every time I thought I had found a way, I ended up back in the main room, with Gregory and his strange smile watching me. I overheard 2 guests whispering about what happened last time, and my heart sank. What had I gotten myself into? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I approached Gregory directly, asking him what was going on. His smile faded, replaced by a cold, serious expression. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. and he motioned toward a door at the back of the room. I didn't want to go, but two men came up behind me and guided me, no, forced me, toward the door. They shoved me into a dimly lit basement where I saw a group of guests gathered around a table. The atmosphere was tense, silent. They were preparing for something I didn't understand but knew I wanted no part of. Fear gripped me completely. I had to get out of there, now. I pushed past one of the men guarding the door, making a break for it. Gregory shouted after me, but I didn't look back. I ran as fast as I could through the house, down hallways that seemed to twist and turn until I found a small, hidden side door. I burst into the cold night air, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept running, through the dark woods surrounding the mansion, until I finally reached the road. I didn't stop until I was far enough away to feel safe. I reached my car, shaking and out of breath. My phone finally had signal again, but I didn't call anyone. What would I say? Hey, I went to a party and barely escaped some creepy ritual? It sounded insane, even to me. I drove home in silence, my mind racing. I should have felt relieved, but all I could think about was Gregory's words before I escaped. You can run, but we'll find you again. Even now, as I sit here typing this, I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching me. I've locked all the doors, checked the windows, but it doesn't help. I've been getting strange texts from unknown numbers. We'll be in touch soon, they say. I want to leave, to disappear, but I know it won't matter. No matter where I go, they'll follow. They never really let anyone leave. The hiker's cabin. I've been hiking alone for years. Something about the quiet, the solitude, it clears my head in a way nothing else can. The isolation is peaceful, or at least it always was until a few months ago when I took a trip I'll never forget. I had planned a weekend hike in a remote mountain range I hadn't explored before. The area was known for being isolated, with little foot traffic and no cell reception. Perfect, I thought. I needed the break, and I liked the idea of not seeing anyone for a couple of days. Before leaving, I read a few posts online about the trail, nothing serious, just the usual warnings about people getting lost. Apparently, a few hikers had gone missing in the area, but I shrugged it off. Things like that happen sometimes. I packed extra gear, just in case. The morning I set out, everything felt fine. The trail was quiet, just the sound of my boots on the dirt and the occasional rustle of leaves. But as I hiked further, the path became harder to follow. It wasn't well maintained, and at one point, I noticed an old trail sign, barely legible, with deep scratches on it. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have. The deeper I went, the more unsettling it became. The forest was dense, the sunlight barely breaking through the thick canopy. The air felt heavier, and soon the quiet wasn't comforting anymore. It felt oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone or something was watching me. It was silly, I told myself. My mind was playing tricks. Then I saw it, an old, run-down cabin, barely visible through the trees. It was sitting on the edge of a ridge, way off the main trail. Curious, I decided to check it out. I figured it might be a good place to camp for the night. When I got closer, I realized just how abandoned it was. The door was hanging off its hinges, and the inside was musty, with dust coating everything. On a small table in the corner, there was a journal. It looked old, the pages yellowed and crinkled. I flipped through it, expecting to find some scribbled notes, but what I read sent chills down my spine. The entry started normal enough. Another hiker, just like me, out exploring. But as the entries went on, the writer's tone changed. They wrote about feeling watched, hearing footsteps at night. They'd found boot prints outside their tent, though they hadn't seen anyone. The entries became more frantic. "They're following me," one read. Another mentioned hearing heavy breathing outside the cabin door. I laughed nervously. It had to be a joke, or someone trying to freak out anyone who found the place. Still, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling creeping over me. And then, just as I read about the breathing outside the door, I heard it. A faint shuffle. Someone, or something, moving outside the cabin. My heart raced, but I told myself it had to be an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. I stayed still, straining to hear, but after a few moments, the sound stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped outside. Nothing. The forest was still. Relieved, I went back in, but that's when I saw them. Fresh boot prints in the mud leading right up to the door. They weren't mine. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself it was just another hiker. Maybe they'd passed by and didn't want to disturb me. But the location, so far off any trail, made that hard to believe. As night fell, the forest became a symphony of unsettling noises, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and the wind howling through the trees. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps circling the cabin, stopping, then starting again. At one point, I heard scratching at the window, like someone was dragging something sharp along the glass. I checked outside again, but just like before, there was nothing. Only this time, more boot prints had appeared, and I swear they looked like there were at least 2 or 3 sets now. I locked the door, double-checked it, but sleep didn't come. I stayed awake, listening, jumping at every creak of the old cabin. When the morning light finally broke through, I packed up my things. I couldn't spend another night there. I stepped outside and froze. The door, which I had locked, was slightly ajar. More boot prints trailed away from the cabin and disappeared into the woods. I didn't waste time. I started down the trail as fast as I could, but the feeling of being followed didn't leave me. Every few minutes I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but whenever I stopped, the sound would vanish. The trail seemed unfamiliar, even though it was the same path I had taken up. The trees looked different, the forest more closed in, like it was swallowing me whole. Then, just as I turned a corner, I saw them. 3 figures, standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me. They didn't move. I panicked. I left the trail, hoping I could lose them in the thick underbrush. I ran until my lungs burned, the sound of breaking branches behind me confirming they were following. I didn't stop until I broke through to another trail, where a group of hikers stood. I gasped for air, expecting relief, but they just stared at me, unmoving, their faces expressionless. It felt like hours before I made it back to the trailhead. I practically ran to my car, but even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being followed. Every few minutes, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone. When I got home, I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. Maybe I'd imagined the figures. Maybe the boot prints were just another hiker's. But when I pulled into my driveway, my heart dropped. There, leading up to my front door, were fresh boot prints. I haven't gone hiking since. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up sure I can hear footsteps outside my window. I tell myself it's just the wind, but I'm not sure I believe that anymore. The midnight call. I didn't think much of it at first. My life was normal, a little boring maybe, but comfortable. I live alone in a small apartment on the edge of the city, nothing fancy. I like my space, and honestly, I've always enjoyed the quiet. I work a typical office job, come home, watch some TV, maybe read a bit before bed. My routine rarely changes. Looking back now, I realize I miss the signs. The strange noises in the hallway late at night. I thought it was just the neighbors. There was that one guy who always seemed to be hanging around near my door, but he never said anything, so I didn't think too much of it. Once I could have sworn I heard something on my fire escape, but I convinced myself it was just the wind. I shrugged it all off. Then, one evening, I noticed something odd. I had a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. I figured it was a telemarketer and ignored it. That was the beginning. A few nights later, it was past midnight and my phone rang again. I answered without thinking. No one spoke. There was just breathing, slow, heavy breathing, and what sounded like faint footsteps in the background. I hung up immediately, convinced it was some weirdo playing a prank. It creeped me out, but I tried to brush it off. But the calls didn't stop. Over the next week, they came every few nights, always from different numbers. It was the same every time. Heavy breathing, sometimes the sound of a door creaking, other times soft, unintelligible whispers. I blocked the numbers, but they always found a way back. At first, I thought I was overreacting, but as it continued, the unease started creeping into my days. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder on the way home. I noticed a car parked outside my apartment building more than usual. I felt like someone was watching me. Then, one day, the pattern changed. I got a call in the middle of the day, which never happened before. I was at work, and I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer. This time, there was no breathing, no footsteps. Instead, I heard my own voice. It was like someone had recorded me from one of my previous calls. Hearing my own voice echo back at me, panicked and uncertain, made my blood run cold. I hung up, my hands shaking. I decided to change my number. I thought it would solve everything. For a few days, it worked. No calls, no strange numbers. I started to relax, thinking maybe it had all been some stupid joke. But it didn't last. A week later, my phone rang again. New number, same heavy breathing. I couldn't believe it. I told a few friends, hoping they'd take it seriously, but most of them shrugged it off. Probably some random creep, they said. Just ignore it. But how do you ignore something like that when it follows you everywhere? I tried to go back to my routine, but it wasn't the same. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart raced. I jumped at the slightest sound. At night, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door. Sometimes I'd get up to check, but when I looked through the peephole, no one was there. One evening, I came home to find my mail open. Nothing was taken, but it was obvious someone had gone through it. The worst part was the phone call I got while I was in the shower. My phone was in the kitchen, but I could hear it ringing. I hurried out, dripping wet, and saw I had missed a call. The number was unfamiliar, and when I glanced out the window, I thought I saw a shadowy figure standing near the building. My heart pounded as I shut the blinds. I finally called the phone company to trace the calls, hoping they could help. But what they told me was worse than anything I expected. The numbers I'd been receiving calls from didn't exist. They weren't registered with any carrier. I felt the walls closing in. How was that even possible? The worst night came when I woke up to my phone ringing again. It was the same number. This time, there was a voice. It was low, distorted, and it said my name. Just my name, nothing else. I froze, fear locking me in place. When I finally spoke, my voice shook, but before I could say anything more, the call ended. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, deciding I would stay at a friend's house for a few days. As I was about to leave, the phone rang again. I knew I shouldn't answer, but my hand moved on its own. The same voice, low and chilling, said, "You can't leave." I dropped the phone, panic flooding me. I ran to the door and looked through the peephole. There was someone standing right outside. Their footsteps were slow, deliberate. I opened the door, but no one was there. My phone, lying on the floor, started ringing again, this time from the inside of my apartment. I hadn't even left it near me. That's when I realized something was horribly wrong. I scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. My eyes landed on the smoke detector. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but something about it seemed off. I climbed onto a chair, pulled it off the wall, and found a tiny camera inside. Someone had been watching me. I tore it down and disconnected my phone. I filed a police report, but they couldn't find anything. No evidence, no leads. The call stopped for a while, but the feeling of being watched never left. Every time I came home, I felt eyes on me, like someone was waiting just out of sight. Then, one day, after weeks of silence, my phone lit up again. I hadn't even turned it on, but there it was, another missed call from the same number. I moved to a new apartment thinking I'd be safe, but the fear followed me. I keep my phone off most of the time, but every now and then I check it. The number still shows up no matter what I do. Even as I write this, I can feel someone watching. Every so often, I hear a soft knock at my door, and I know my phone is about to buzz again. I don't think this will ever end. I never thought I'd be one of those people writing on here about something terrifying, but here I am. This happened last weekend, and I can't stop thinking about it. I want to share what happened, maybe as a warning, or maybe just to get it off my chest. This experience has completely changed how I feel about ride shares, and I don't know if I'll ever feel safe using one again. It was a typical night out with friends. We hadn't seen each other in a while, so we decided to meet up for drinks at a local bar. Time got away from me, and before I knew it, it was almost 2 a.m. I live a bit outside the city, so instead of taking the train, I decided to call a ride share. I've used them so many times without any issues that I didn't even think twice about it. When the car pulled up, I got in the back seat. The driver smiled, maybe a little too widely, but I was tired, and I brushed it off as nothing. We exchanged the usual small talk, how long he'd been driving, how busy the night had been. He seemed friendly enough, but something felt off. It wasn't anything specific at first, just a weird feeling. I ignored it. A few minutes into the ride, I noticed we weren't following the usual route home. I pulled up the map on my phone and saw that we were headed in the opposite direction. When I asked him about it, he gave me a quick explanation about traffic and road work. He said he knew a shortcut and that it would save time. I wasn't thrilled, but I didn't push it. I figured he knew what he was doing. As we drove further away from the city, I started to get nervous. The streets were getting darker, more isolated. We weren't passing any other cars, and I couldn't see any familiar landmarks. I texted my friend, telling her I was on my way home and shared my location, just in case. I tried to stay calm, convincing myself I was overreacting. That's when he missed another turn. My stomach dropped. I looked at the map again. This was definitely not the way. I asked him if we were still on the shortcut, but his response was short, almost annoyed this time. Yeah, just a few more minutes. I felt a pit form in my stomach. Something was wrong. I texted my friend again, this time adding, "This feels weird. He's taking a weird route. I'll let you know when I'm close." I was trying to be discreet, but then I heard the click of the locks engaging. I glanced down and saw that he had locked the doors. My heart started racing. I tried to stay calm, but panic was bubbling up. I discreetly checked the door. The child locks were on. I couldn't open it from the inside. I asked him why he locked the doors, and he didn't respond. He just kept driving, eyes focused on the road, ignoring me completely. My mind was racing. Should I call someone? Should I try to jump out at the next stop? I realized we hadn't stopped for a while, and there weren't any lights or signs of civilization nearby. I looked down at my phone again and saw that I had no service, no way to send a message, no way to call for help. My battery was also low, and I knew I had to conserve it. I tried to make conversation, my voice shaking slightly. "So, how much longer until we're back on the main road?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't even look at me this time, just mumbled something I couldn't understand. My hands were shaking now. We were completely isolated. No cars, no street lights, just darkness ahead of us. I kept glancing at the road, hoping to see something familiar, but nothing. The silence in the car was suffocating. Every time we turned, I felt a little more trapped. I checked my phone again, desperately trying to get a signal, but it was useless. Then, out of nowhere, he sped up. I could feel the car accelerating, the engine roaring louder as we raced down the road. My heart was pounding in my chest. I fumbled with my phone, trying to unlock it and dial 911. But before I could, the screen went black. My phone was dead. I was out of options. That's when I noticed the emergency hammer tucked in the seat pocket. It was one of those hammers they put in ride shares for safety, in case of accidents. My hands were trembling, but I slowly reached for it, trying to be as quiet as possible. Just as my fingers wrapped around it, the driver glanced back at me. Our eyes met in the rearview mirror, and for the first time, I saw something that terrified me even more than the situation itself. His expression was cold, almost calculating. I knew then that he had no intention of taking me home. There was no reasoning with him. In a panic, I swung the hammer at the window, shattering the glass. The noise was deafening in the quiet car, and the driver jerked the wheel. For a brief second, the car swerved, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd gotten my chance to escape. But he quickly regained control, and the car sped up even more. I was shaking all over, my heart pounding in my ears. The road ahead was still pitch black, stretching on forever. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next, but I couldn't think straight. I had no phone and no way out, and the driver was going faster by the second. Finally, I saw a fork in the road up ahead. He slowed down, but not in a way that suggested he was letting me go. It felt like the calm before something terrible. My thoughts were spiraling. How had I let this happen? Why didn't I trust my instincts earlier? But there was no time for regrets. The car slowed to a crawl as we approached the fork, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. I'm not sure how I made it out of that situation, but I'll never forget the terror of that night. I guess I'm lucky to be writing this at all, but I don't think I'll ever feel safe in a rideshare again. Let this be a warning. Trust your gut. I've taken the detailed outline provided and crafted the story in a first-person perspective, following the exact structure, tone, and pacing specified. The language is simple, and the tone remains dark and serious, focusing on real-life horror without any supernatural elements. The Forgotten Alley. I've been walking the same route home from work for years. My job is your typical 9 to 5 grind in an office. Nothing glamorous, just data entry stuff. I live in a quiet neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happens, and until recently, I liked it that way. There's an alley I use as a shortcut. It saves me about 10 minutes, and honestly, after a long day, that time makes a difference. The alley is narrow, squeezed between two long brick buildings. It's dimly lit, with a couple of flickering streetlights and garbage bins lined up along the walls. It's quiet too. So quiet that sometimes I hear my own footsteps echoing back at me. I never thought much of it until one night, not long ago. I was walking home like usual, my mind on autopilot. I remember hearing footsteps behind me, clear and deliberate, matching my pace. I turned, but no one was there. The alley was empty, just as it always had been. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just an echo or someone far behind me that I couldn't see. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next couple of days were uneventful, or at least I tried to convince myself they were. But every time I walked through that alley, I started hearing those footsteps again. They weren't just the occasional sound, though. They were there, in sync with every step I took. I tried walking faster, but the sound kept up. When I slowed down, the footsteps did too. That's when the fear started to set in. I told myself it was my imagination, maybe some weird echo bouncing off the walls. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. I wasn't hearing it anywhere else, only in that alley. One night, I saw something that really rattled me. I was halfway through the alley when I noticed someone standing at the far end, just standing there, staring. I froze. My heart was pounding in my ears. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. Then, just as suddenly as I saw them, they stepped out of view, disappearing behind the corner. I didn't stick around to see where they went. I turned and practically ran home. After that, I stopped using the alley. I went out of my way to avoid it, even if it meant walking 15 extra minutes. But the feeling of being followed didn't go away. It followed me onto the main roads. I'd catch glimpses of someone out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and see nothing. Every little sound made me jump. The rustling of leaves, the click of someone's heels on the sidewalk. The worst part was that I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed, wide awake, listening for footsteps outside my window or on the stairs. My job started to suffer. I'd show up late, barely able to keep my eyes open. I tried talking to a coworker about it, but they brushed it off. "You're stressed," they said, "probably just overthinking things." That only made me feel more isolated. No one seemed to get it. I was alone in this, whatever this was. I don't know what came over me that night, but I decided I had to go back. I was sick of feeling afraid, tired of being on edge. I grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife, stupid, I know, and headed back to the alley. It was late, maybe midnight, but I didn't care. I needed to know if it was real or if I was just losing my mind. The alley was as empty and quiet as always, except this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there, watching me. My hands were sweating, my heart racing. Halfway through, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they weren't distant. They were right behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, and that's when I saw them, just a few feet away, a shadowed figure. They didn't say anything, didn't move. They just stood there, staring at me from the darkness. I yelled something, I don't even remember what, demanding to know who they were, but there was no response. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. I couldn't see their face, couldn't tell if they were even human. The way they stood, so still, it was unnatural. That's when I ran. I turned and bolted toward the end of the alley. My flashlight was flickering, casting shaky beams of light that barely illuminated the path in front of me. I could hear the footsteps right behind me, growing louder, closer. I stumbled, almost tripping over my own feet, but I didn't stop. I burst out of the alley and into the street. The footsteps stopped. I turned around, breathing hard, expecting to see someone there, but the alley was empty, just like it always was. When I got home, I locked every door and window. I sat there in the dark, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself it was over, but the feeling of being watched, it didn't go away. I felt eyes on me even in my own apartment. A few nights later, I heard a knock on the door. It was late, too late for visitors. My heart dropped. I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. No one. The hallway was empty. My hands were shaking as I backed away from the door. I didn't sleep at all that night. Since then, I've barely left my apartment. I called in sick to work. I don't eat much. I just sit by the window, watching, waiting for something to happen. The paranoia is eating me alive. I've thought about moving, starting over somewhere far away. Maybe that will stop this feeling. I started packing last night, but when I looked out the window, I saw them again. The figure was standing at the end of my driveway, just watching me. I don't know if I'm imagining it anymore. Maybe I've lost it. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone, and I'm starting to wonder if I ever will be. Word, count 1,000 wows. The friendly neighbor. I moved into this apartment complex about 6 months ago. I was fresh off a long-term relationship and, honestly, looking forward to some peace and quiet. The apartment isn't anything special, just a small, one-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood. At first, I loved the solitude. I could focus on myself, start over, and heal. That was the plan anyway. Not long after I moved in, I met Tom. He's an older man, probably in his 60s, living in the unit across from mine. He introduced himself with this big, eager smile and said if I ever needed anything, he'd be happy to help. I appreciated the gesture at first, you know? He seemed like a kind, harmless guy, maybe a little lonely, but something about him felt off. He was too eager, too friendly. I shrugged it off as me being overly sensitive, considering everything I'd been through. After that first encounter, Tom started showing up more often. He'd catch me in the hallway as I came home from work or leave his apartment just as I was leaving mine. The small talk quickly turned into something more uncomfortable. He started bringing me things, cookies, an old book, even a pair of mittens one time. It wasn't creepy at first, just weird. I mean, who gives their neighbor mittens out of nowhere? I kept being polite, but inside, I was starting to feel smothered. Then one night, he knocked on my door around 7 p.m., asking if I wanted to grab coffee with him. I politely declined, using work as an excuse. He seemed disappointed, but left. Or so I thought. 10 minutes later, I heard another knock, then another. I didn't answer, hoping he'd take the hint. But he didn't leave. He stood there for what felt like hours, muttering to himself. I was too scared to confront him. The next morning, I found a note taped to my door. It was written in this shaky, almost childlike handwriting. "I'm sorry if I was too pushy last night," it said. "I just really liked talking to you." There was something about the way he apologized that made my skin crawl. Was I overreacting? I wasn't sure, but that note put me on edge. After that, I started avoiding Tom. I'd wait until late at night to leave or come home, trying to dodge him in the hallway. But it didn't matter. He seemed to know when I was there, always lurking, always showing up just as I opened my door. I even saw him standing in the hallway once, late at night, just staring at my door. When I confronted him, he apologized profusely, said he was just checking on me to make sure I was okay. It was always apologies with Tom, but the behavior never stopped. I tried talking to a couple of friends about it, but no one seemed to take me seriously. "He's just a lonely old man," they said. "You're probably reading into it too much." Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being paranoid. But things kept getting worse. One night, I came home to find another note. This one was more detailed, more personal. It mentioned things I hadn't told him, details about my daily routine, what I'd been wearing, even the exact time I left that morning. That's when I realized he wasn't just running into me by accident. He had been watching me. My heart sank, and for the first time, I genuinely feared him. The breaking point came a few days later. I came home late, exhausted from work, and found my apartment door slightly ajar. I knew I had locked it. I always did. Nothing seemed to be missing, but just knowing someone had been inside made me sick. I couldn't shake the feeling that Tom had crossed a line. I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, wide awake, listening for any sound, any sign that Tom was out there. My mind was racing. I had to do something. The next day, I worked up the courage to confront him. I knocked on his door, heart pounding in my chest. When he opened it, he looked surprised, almost nervous. I didn't waste any time. "Why have you been following me? Why did you come into my apartment?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Tom stammered, his face turning pale. I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to be friends," he said, his voice breaking. He looked so pathetic in that moment, so desperate. I didn't know whether to be angry or feel sorry for him. "I've been lonely since my wife passed," he continued. "I didn't mean to scare you. I thought you could use some company." His explanation hit me like a ton of bricks. All this time, I had been living in fear, convinced that he was some kind of predator. But he was just lonely. A lonely old man trying, in the worst way possible, to connect with someone. It didn't change how uncomfortable I'd felt, but it made me realize he wasn't a threat. At least, not the kind of threat I had imagined. I didn't know what to say. I mumbled something about needing space and hurried back to my apartment. Even though I knew now that Tom wasn't dangerous, the fear I'd been living with didn't just go away. The feeling of being watched, of having my personal space violated, it had done something to me. I couldn't stay there anymore. A week later, I packed up my things and moved out. I left Tom a brief note, thanking him for his help and wishing him well, though it felt more like I was closing a chapter of my life I'd rather forget. As I packed the last of my boxes, I found one final note from Tom, left in my mailbox. "I'm sorry," it said. "Good luck in your new place." I shuddered reading it. Even though I knew he hadn't meant any harm, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd never truly feel safe again. Every small sound, every creak in my new apartment made my heart race. A few days ago, I thought I saw someone standing outside my new building watching me. But when I looked again, they were gone. Maybe it was nothing, but then again, maybe not. I've always been the kind of person who relies on Uber after a night out. It's easy, it's safe, and I've never had any issues. At least that's what I used to think. This happened about 6 months ago, and I still haven't fully shaken the feeling that something terrible could have happened that night. It started like any other weekend. I was out with some friends at a bar in the city, having a few drinks. By the time I was ready to leave, it was past midnight. I wasn't drunk, just buzzed, and I figured it was time to head home. The city was alive around me, people laughing, taxis driving by, nothing unusual. I opened the Uber app and ordered a ride, something I've done countless times before. But as I stood there waiting, a strange feeling settled in my gut. You know that little voice that tells you something's off? I had that, but I brushed it off as me being tired. My phone buzzed, and I saw the notification that my Uber had arrived. I glanced up from my screen, and a car pulled up right in front of me. I didn't check the license plate. I didn't even check the driver's face. I just got in. The car started moving, and I tried to make small talk, as I usually do, but the driver didn't respond. At all. He didn't even look at me. Okay, I thought, maybe he's not the chatty type. I shrugged it off and started scrolling through my phone, zoning out. After a few minutes, though, I noticed something odd. The route didn't look familiar. I've taken Ubers home from this part of the city plenty of times, but this didn't feel right. I opened the app again to double check, and my stomach dropped. The car wasn't going toward my apartment. In fact, we were moving further away from the city center. I spoke up. "Hey, is this the right way? Shouldn't we be heading downtown?" No answer. The driver kept his eyes on the road, his face completely blank, almost like he didn't hear me. That's when I felt the first real flicker of fear. I asked again, louder this time, but still, nothing. He didn't even flinch. My heart started racing, and I found myself gripping my phone like it was some sort of lifeline. I glanced out the window, and I realized we were driving through darker, more isolated streets now. No streetlights, no people, just empty roads. I checked the app again, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The ride was marked as complete. The car wasn't even registered as moving anymore. Panic set in. I leaned forward, banging my fist against the back of the driver's seat. "Where the hell are you taking me?" I shouted, but the driver didn't react. His hands were locked onto the steering wheel, knuckles white. his eyes fixed straight ahead. At that moment, I knew I was in real trouble. I looked out the window again, desperate to figure out where I was, but the surroundings were completely unfamiliar. Industrial buildings, abandoned warehouses, nothing but darkness. My mind raced through the possibilities. Had I gotten into the wrong car? Who was this guy? What was he planning to do with me? I reached for the door handle, but it was locked. I pressed the unlock button, but it didn't work. I tried again and again, but nothing. I was trapped. The car turned into a large, empty parking lot and came to a stop. The engine went silent. The driver still didn't say a word. For a few seconds, everything felt frozen, like time had slowed down. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my breathing became shallow. I tried to think of what to do next, but I couldn't focus. My mind was screaming at me to get out of the car, but how? "Hey!" I yelled again, my voice shaking. "What the hell is going on?" I fumbled for my phone, trying to call someone, anyone, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. And then the driver spoke. His voice was calm, almost casual, as if this were any normal ride. "You shouldn't have gotten in." That's when my survival instincts kicked in. Without thinking, I threw my shoulder against the door, trying to break it open, but it wouldn't budge. The driver started reaching for something under his seat. I didn't wait to find out what it was. In a blind panic, I slammed my fist against the window again and again until I felt the glass give way. It shattered, and I didn't hesitate. I crawled out, shards cutting into my skin, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I hit the ground running, sprinting across the parking lot without looking back. My legs felt weak, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I didn't stop until I saw headlights in the distance. A car was coming down the road, and I waved it down, desperate for help. The driver rolled down the window, wide-eyed as I explained what had just happened, blood dripping down my arms and legs. "Please, just take me to the police," I begged, and thankfully, they agreed. As we drove away, I glanced back at the parking lot. The car was gone. Even though I'd escaped, the questions haunted me. Who was that man? What would have happened if I hadn't broken the window in time? The police couldn't help much. The Uber app showed no record of the ride, and there was nothing to trace. To this day, I don't use ride shares anymore. Every time a car pulls up beside me, I get that same knot in my stomach. I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, waiting for his next passenger. The babysitter. I don't usually babysit anymore, but when I was in college, I used to take jobs here and there to make some extra cash. This one job sticks with me though, and I haven't been able to shake it, even years later. I was hired by this well-off family in an upscale neighborhood. The kind of place where everything looks perfect but feels cold, almost too polished. The parents seemed nice enough, polite but distant. They left me a long list of instructions, but I'd done this before, so I wasn't worried. Their house was huge and modern, all sleek lines and wide open spaces. It was quiet, too quiet. After I put the kids to bed, I settled into the living room to study. But from the beginning, something about that house just felt off. I kept catching myself glancing at the knives on display in the kitchen. They were just a decoration, sure, but the way they were arranged, all sharp and shiny, felt like a warning. I brushed it off. I wasn't going to let my imagination get the better of me. Around 9 p.m., I got a text from the parents checking in. They'd be home late, but everything seemed fine. I was about to put my phone down when another message came through. "Don't look out the windows." I laughed a little, thinking it was some weird joke. I texted back asking, "Why?" but no response. I stared at the screen for a minute before shrugging it off. People have their quirks, right? But still, I couldn't shake the weirdness. Why would they tell me that? About an hour later, I heard it for the first time. A light tapping. It was so faint I thought I imagined it at first. Then it came again, a soft scratching sound near the front window. I told myself it was just the wind or maybe an animal outside, but the longer I sat there, the more I felt like something was wrong. I tried texting the parents again. Did you really mean what you said about the windows? Still no answer. The house seemed to grow colder, the silence around me thicker. My heart started pounding for no reason I could understand. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It's just a house, just a normal night. But the tapping kept coming, like something or someone was trying to get my attention. My throat tightened as I debated what to do. I knew I wasn't supposed to look, but what was the harm? Maybe I could just prove to myself there was nothing there and move on. After what felt like an eternity, I worked up the nerve and walked slowly to the window. I peeked out, holding my breath. Nothing. The yard was empty. My body relaxed a little. I almost laughed at myself. But just as I started to turn away, the sound moved, this time from the back of the house, scratching, deliberate. My nerves shot up again. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking every lock. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and sat back on the couch, trying to focus on anything but that sound. My phone buzzed with a message from a friend, but I ignored it. Every little noise in the house felt amplified now. The flicker of the lights, the hum of the refrigerator, it all seemed too loud, too close. I thought about calling the police, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was overreacting. What would I even tell them? That I heard some scratching sounds? That I got a weird text? It sounded stupid. Still, my hands were shaking as I checked my phone again. One of my texts to the parents was stuck, unsent. Are you sure you sent that last text? Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The house was deadly silent. I thought for a moment that it was over, that maybe it had all been in my head. Then I heard it. A soft, low laugh, faint but right outside the window. I froze. It wasn't loud, just enough for me to hear, like someone mocking me. I didn't dare move. For a few minutes, I just sat there, gripping the knife in my hand, barely breathing. What the hell was going on? I don't know how long I stayed like that before my phone buzzed again. It was the parents. We're on our way home. Be there in 15. Relief flooded me, but so did a fresh wave of fear. How could they be so casual about it? Didn't they know something weird was happening? There was a loud knock at the front door. I jumped, my heart hammering in my chest. The knocking stopped, but I could hear footsteps outside. My stomach dropped as I realized someone, or something, was circling the house. I heard the parents' car pull up in the driveway. I rushed to the door, eager for them to come in. As I reached for the lock, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, just barely visible, moving away from the house into the trees. My blood went cold. The parents walked in, laughing and chatting like nothing was wrong. I tried to explain what happened, the scratching, the text, the shadow, but they just smiled and shrugged. "Oh, that's probably the neighborhood prankster," the dad said. "He likes to mess with babysitters." I stared at them, waiting for them to say more, but they didn't seem concerned at all. When I asked why they told me not to look out the windows, they just brushed it off. "Oh, that?" the mom said, smiling as if it were nothing. "We didn't want you to get spooked. It's just a joke." They handed me my payment and told me to drive safe, like everything was fine. I left the house feeling like I was in a daze. I couldn't stop thinking about that shadow, or the laugh. Something was wrong with that house. With them. I don't know what it was, but I never went back. I haven't babysat since. That night still haunts me. Even now, I can't sleep near windows. Every little noise outside makes my heart race. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear that same soft scratching, faint but persistent, like it's following me. I checked my phone again that night before bed, and there was one more text from an unknown number. Don't look out your window. A few weeks ago, my friends and I decided to go on a hiking trip to a national park. We'd been planning it for a while, just a weekend getaway to disconnect and enjoy some nature. There were four of us: me, Amy, Mark, and Sarah. We've known each other for years and have done hikes together before, but this time felt different. On the drive up, I remember hearing something on the radio about a couple of hikers who had gone missing in the same park we were heading to. I didn't think much of it. It's a big park, after all. People get lost all the time, right? Still, there was this weird feeling I couldn't shake. When we pulled up to the trailhead, there were no other cars around, which was strange for a Saturday. Even the park ranger gave us an odd look as we headed out, but I brushed it off. As we unpacked our gear, I noticed something off about Amy. She was quieter than usual, distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. At the time, I didn't think too much of it. Now, I wish I had. The catalyst. The hike started off great. The weather was perfect, and we were all in good spirits. We joked around, took photos, and talked about how we should make this an annual thing. Everything felt normal. But as we went deeper into the forest, the mood started to shift. The birds stopped chirping, and the usual sounds of the forest seemed to disappear. It was unsettling, but no one said anything. I think we were all trying to stay positive, not wanting to freak each other out. At one point, Amy said she needed to tie her shoes and told us to go ahead. We walked a few more minutes before realizing she hadn't caught up. We stopped and waited, calling her name, thinking she was just playing a prank. But after a while, the laughter died down, and we started to feel something was wrong. We went back to where we last saw her, calling out, but there was no sign of her. It was like she had vanished. Panic set in. We retraced our steps, yelling her name, but the forest seemed to swallow our voices. Everything started to blur together. The trees, the ground, it all looked the same. We couldn't find any trace of Amy. An hour later, Mark suggested we split up to cover more ground. I didn't want to, but it seemed like the only option. As we fanned out, I realized we didn't have cell signal, and the sun was starting to set. A knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Escalation of horror hours passed, and the search for Amy felt hopeless. It was like we were walking in circles. The familiar landmarks we passed earlier were gone, replaced by thick, unfamiliar woods. Nothing looked the same anymore. The panic in our group turned to frustration. Sarah accused Mark of not paying attention, as if it was his fault that Amy disappeared. We were all on edge, and the paranoia started creeping in. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every rustle in the bushes, every crack of a branch made my heart race. My mind was playing tricks on me. I kept thinking I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing. The quiet was oppressive, like the forest itself was trying to suffocate us. We decided to head back to the parking lot to get help, but the path we came from was gone. I swear it was there earlier, but now we were completely disoriented. As we reached a small clearing, I stopped to adjust my backpack. That's when I noticed something weird. There was a small, folded piece of paper sticking out of the side pocket. I don't remember putting it there. I opened it, and in shaky handwriting it said, "You're next." Climax. I froze. The weight of the note in my hands felt like a lead weight in my chest. Was this some kind of sick joke? I looked at Mark and Sarah, but neither of them seemed to know what was going on. I didn't say anything about the note at first. I didn't know who to trust. The tension among us snapped. Mark wanted to run back the way we came, while Sarah insisted we stay put until morning. Nobody could agree, and the fear was eating away at us. We were falling apart. I started noticing every little thing, every shadow, every sound. It all felt like a threat. I couldn't stop thinking about Amy. Had she known something we didn't? Was she in on it, or was she the first victim? I didn't know what to believe anymore. Eventually, I found myself alone. The others had wandered off in their panic, each going in a different direction. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I was plunged into darkness. In the silence, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Falling action. I don't remember how I made it back to the campsite, but when I did, I collapsed next to the dying embers of the fire. My legs were trembling, and my breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The woods were silent again, too silent. It felt wrong. I tried to calm myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. The footsteps I heard in the forest echoed in my mind, growing louder with each passing minute. I couldn't make sense of any of it. I kept replaying everything over and over, but nothing added up. As I sat there in the darkness, I felt something beneath my sleeping bag. I pulled it out. Another note. This one said, "It's too late. Conclusion." Amy was never found. After we made it back and reported her missing, the authorities searched the park, but there was no trace of her. Mark, Sarah, and I drifted apart after that. None of us could handle talking about it. We never really spoke again. I haven't gone hiking since. I can't sleep without thinking about Amy or the notes. I don't know who left them or why, but the fear hasn't left me. Every time I hear a creak in the house or footsteps outside, I think it's starting again. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear those same footsteps, getting closer. The hotel room. I don't usually post stuff like this, but I haven't been able to shake what happened to me a couple of months ago. It was a normal business trip, nothing special. I travel often for work, and this time I had a conference in a small city a few hours away. I booked a room at a pretty standard hotel, one of those mid-tier chains where everything's functional but kind of dated. The hotel itself felt normal enough. The lobby was clean, the staff friendly, but the hallway leading to my room was eerily empty. I brushed it off as just being late in the evening. My room was on the third floor. It wasn't huge, but it had all the basics: a queen bed, a small desk, a TV. As I unpacked, I noticed something, a door connecting my room to the one next to it. You know the type, where both sides have to be unlocked for it to open. I don't know why it made me uneasy. It was locked on my side, but still, I made sure it was bolted, and that was that. I settled in, watched some TV, and tried to relax before bed. But something felt off. The air conditioning made this low humming sound that wasn't quite right, almost too loud for the room's size. The hallway outside my door was quiet. Too quiet, considering I'd seen a few other guests when I checked in. I told myself I was just tired. I turned off the lights and crawled into bed. I wasn't sure how long I'd been lying there when I first heard it. Tapping. At first, I thought it was coming from the window, maybe a branch or something outside. But the sound wasn't random. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. I sat up, listening closely, and realized the tapping wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the connecting door. I've stayed in enough hotels to know that sometimes the walls are thin. Maybe the person next door was tapping something on their side of the door. I knocked lightly, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. The tapping stopped immediately. I felt a wave of relief, figuring I had startled whoever it was. But then, nothing. It didn't start again. I lay back down, but the silence felt heavier than before. A few minutes passed, and just as I was drifting off, the tapping came back. This time, it was louder, like someone was knocking directly on my door. I shot up, heart racing. Something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk. I felt a little silly, but I needed to know. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "There's some noise coming from the room next to mine. Could you check it?" The front desk clerk hesitated. "Ma'am, the room next to you is unoccupied." I froze. "Are you sure?" "Yes, it's been empty for a few days. No one's checked in." My stomach dropped. I hung up without saying anything else, staring at the connecting door. There was no way I was imagining that sound. I got up and checked the bolt again, just to be sure. It was locked, but that didn't stop the sinking feeling in my chest. I tried to sleep after that, but I kept hearing it. Tap, 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 every few minutes. I told myself I was imagining things, but my gut told me otherwise. At some point, the tapping changed. It wasn't just tapping anymore. I could hear faint shuffling, like someone was moving on the other side. I felt like I was being watched. I grabbed a chair and placed it under the doorknob, hoping it would make me feel a little safer. But then, curiosity got the better of me. I crept over to the door and looked through the peephole. At first, I didn't see anything, just the faint light from the room on the other side. I was about to step back when something moved. A shadow. It was quick, but I saw it. I stumbled away from the door, my heart pounding. Someone was in there. I called the front desk again, this time practically yelling at them to send someone up to check. They agreed, and a few minutes later, I heard security in the hallway. They knocked on the door next to mine, and I listened as they went inside. There were muffled voices, and then a knock on my door. The security guard was polite but firm. "There's no one in the room next to yours, ma'am. We've checked. It's completely empty, and the connecting door is locked from both sides." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something felt wrong. I thanked him and closed the door, but as soon as he left, the tapping started again. This time, it was softer, almost as if whoever was behind the door knew I was trying to ignore it. It felt deliberate, like they were playing with me. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, my eyes fixed on the door. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of a click. I sat up immediately. It was the lock on the connecting door. I watched in horror as the door slowly creaked open. Just a crack. Not enough to see anything, but enough to know someone had unlocked it from the other side. I didn't move. I couldn't. The door stayed cracked open for what felt like an eternity, and then it closed. Softly, quietly. Almost as if whoever was there had changed their mind. I didn't wait. I grabbed my things, threw them into my suitcase, and bolted out of the room. As I reached the door to the hallway, I heard it one last time. Tap, tap, tap. I checked out at dawn. The clerk gave me a strange look, almost like she knew. I didn't ask, I just wanted to leave. I drove home in silence, trying to convince myself that I'd overreacted. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that someone, something, was in that room. I don't stay in hotels with connecting doors anymore. But sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet, I swear I can still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. The confusing delivery. I've never been the kind of person to get worked up over small things. My life's pretty straightforward. Work a 9-to-5 job, come home, watch TV, repeat. I live alone in a small apartment building with thin walls, so I'm used to the usual noises. People walking down the hallway, doors creaking, stuff like that. I guess you could say my life was pretty normal until the packages started arriving. It all began on a Tuesday morning. I was heading out for work when I noticed a small box sitting in front of my door. It was strange because I hadn't ordered anything, but there it was, with my name and apartment number on it. I figured it was just a mistake, so I opened it. Inside was a set of kitchen knives. Not the cheap kind either. These were high-end, professional knives. I don't cook much, so it felt odd, but I shrugged it off. Maybe I'd ordered them late one night and forgot. The next day, another package showed up. This time, it was cleaning supplies. Again, nothing I had ordered. I started to feel a bit uneasy. I mean, it's not like I needed these things, and I couldn't think of anyone who would send them to me. I called the delivery company, but they told me there was no record of my address in their system, no orders, no deliveries. They suggested it was probably a mix-up, but how could it happen twice? By the end of the week, the packages kept coming. Light bulbs, dish soap, towels, all random household items, all with my name on them. I tried to ignore it, hoping it would stop, but then I got a package that changed everything: duct tape and rope. My heart dropped when I opened that box. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. Someone was sending me these things on purpose. I called the delivery company again, but they gave me the same answer. There were no records of deliveries to my apartment. I even tried calling my building's management, but they brushed it off, saying it was probably a prank. A prank. That word stuck with me. Who would go to these lengths to mess with me, and why? The packages started arriving more frequently after that, sometimes twice a day. It wasn't just duct tape and rope anymore. Now there were zip ties, gloves, a balaclava. I stopped opening them after a while. I didn't even want to touch them. But I couldn't bring myself to throw them away either. It felt like whoever was doing this wanted me to know they were watching, like they were waiting for me to break. I started avoiding my neighbors too. Every time I passed someone in the hallway, I wondered if they were behind it. My paranoia grew worse when I realized the packages were arriving at times when the hallway was empty. I began to feel like I was being watched, like someone knew my every move. At night, I would hear footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate footsteps, stopping just as they reached my apartment. But whenever I looked, there was no one there. Just another package. One night, the footsteps came again. This time, I grabbed a kitchen knife, the one from the first package, and stood by the door, heart pounding. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. When I finally opened the door, all I saw was another box, and inside it, a hunting knife. That's when I lost it. I was done being scared. I took the knife and sat by the door, waiting for whoever it was to show up. Hours passed, and nothing happened. Eventually, I decided to confront my landlord. I was sure he knew something. Maybe he was in on it. It was late, and the building was eerily quiet as I walked down the hallway. That's when one of my neighbors approached me. "I've seen someone hanging around your door at night," he said, eyes wide with concern. "I don't know who it is, but you should be careful." His words sent chills down my spine. I didn't know what to think. Who could it be? Was someone really stalking me, or was this just part of the game? I hurried back to my apartment, but when I got there, another package was waiting for me. Inside my apartment this time. I hadn't heard the door open. My stomach turned as I picked it up. This wasn't just a prank anymore. Someone had been inside. The days that followed were quiet. No more packages, no footsteps. But the silence didn't bring any comfort. It was worse. I kept expecting something to happen, waiting for the next knock, the next box. Every creak in the walls made my skin crawl. The anxiety gnawed at me. I tried reporting it again, but no one took me seriously. To them, it was just a joke that had gone too far. Then, one night, I heard a knock at the door. My chest tightened as I approached. But when I opened it, there was no package, just a small note taped to the door. Was it fun? The next day, I found out who it was. The neighbor who had warned me, he'd been behind it the whole time. He confessed, laughing it off like it was some kind of harmless prank. "I was just messing with you, man. It was supposed to be funny." Funny? That word made me sick. There were no charges, no consequences. To everyone else, it was just a prank. But it didn't end there for me. I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore. Every time I hear a knock, Every time I see a package, my heart races and I wonder if it's starting all over again. That fear never really goes away. Even now, I keep waiting for the next package to arrive. The abandoned car. I've made this drive 100 times before, but something felt different that night. I was heading home after visiting a friend in a rural part of town, a place surrounded by fields and empty roads. Normally, I enjoyed the quiet, the solitude, the way you could see the stars in the clear sky. But that night, it felt off. The road was too quiet, too empty, and for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was alone in a way that I hadn't been before. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and endless. I was tired, but not too far from home. That's when I saw it, an abandoned car on the side of the road. It wasn't wrecked or damaged, just sitting there. It looked like it had been there for a while, but not long enough to be forgotten. The strangest part was, there was no one around. Normally, I wouldn't stop. It's common sense, right? You don't pull over in the middle of nowhere. But something about the car made me hesitate. What if someone needed help? I debated with myself for a minute, slowing down as I got closer. There were no lights on in the car, no movement. It looked perfectly fine, except that it was deserted. Against my better judgment, I pulled over a few feet ahead of it. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe concern. But as soon as I opened my door, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you realize just how alone you really are. The wind wasn't even blowing. Nothing. I walked towards the car, trying to keep calm. Each step felt heavier than the last. As I got closer, I noticed there was no visible damage. The doors were closed, the windows intact. Everything looked normal, too normal. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, but it was there, gnawing at me. Just as I leaned in to peer through the window, I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from behind me. My heart stopped. I spun around so fast I almost lost my balance, expecting to see someone standing right there. But there was nothing. No one. I stood frozen for a second, ears straining to hear another sound, eyes scanning the darkness. The road was empty, just as it had been a few minutes ago. The trees lining the road seemed closer now, their shadows stretching out ominously under the dim light of the moon. But there was no one there. I could still hear the echo of those footsteps in my mind, though. They had been real. I was sure of it. I forced myself to breathe, turning slowly back to my car. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, fast. But as I started walking back, I kept glancing at the tree line. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The silence was suffocating now, pressing down on me from every direction. Each step I took towards my car felt like it was being monitored, measured. By the time I reached my car door, I was practically shaking. I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling as I tried to unlock the door. Just as I was about to get in, a dull thud came from behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me freeze. It came from the back of my car. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to know what caused the noise. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, yanking the door open and slamming it shut behind me. I jammed the key into the ignition, but the car stalled for a second, the engine whining before it roared to life. My heart was racing. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing there, but all I saw was the empty road. Then, the headlights flickered on behind me. The abandoned car. It wasn't abandoned. I slammed on the gas, tearing down the road, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the mirror. The car followed, its headlights burning into my rear view. My mind was racing as fast as my heart. I didn't know what to do. The road stretched on forever. No turns, no other cars. Just me and whoever was behind me. I sped up, my tires screeching on the asphalt. But no matter how fast I went, the car stayed with me. I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles ached. And then, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and my blood went cold. A message from an unknown number. "You can't run forever." I nearly swerved off the road, my vision blurring for a moment as panic seized me. I kept driving, but my mind was reeling. How did they have my number? What did they want? Eventually, I noticed the headlights had disappeared, but the fear didn't leave me. I kept driving, checking my mirrors obsessively, convinced they were still there, hiding in the darkness. The night was closing in around me, and I could feel the isolation more than ever. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a weather alert. Dense fog ahead. Great. As if things couldn't get worse. The fog rolled in so fast, it was like driving into a wall of white. My visibility dropped to almost nothing, and I had to slow down, my foot heavy on the brake. I was crawling now, inching forward through the suffocating mist. The silence was back, even more oppressive than before. Finally, I reached a crossroads. I stopped, staring down both paths, unsure of where to go. The fog was so thick it felt like it was wrapping around the car, pressing in on me. My heart was still pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting. And then, I heard it again. Footsteps. Closer this time, louder. I gripped the steering wheel, frozen, unsure of what to do. The fog swallowed everything around me, but those footsteps, they were getting closer. And that's where it ends. I never found out who they were or what they wanted. I'm still here, but I don't feel safe. Not anymore. The Stranger in the Elevator. I live in an older building, the kind where you can hear every creak and groan, especially late at night when it's dead quiet. I've never been one to worry about safety, been living in the city for years without any issues. My routine is pretty standard. I work late, usually coming home around 11 p.m. when the building is empty and I can unwind in peace. That night started like any other. I got home, walked through the lobby, and noticed the elevator doors were open, waiting. That should have been the first sign something was off. The building is old. The elevators don't usually sit open like that. But I was tired and didn't think much of it. I stepped inside and pressed the button for my floor. Just as the doors were closing, a man slipped in behind me. I didn't see him clearly at first. He had a hoodie pulled up, head slightly lowered. No bags, no groceries, just him, standing in the corner, unnervingly still. I figured he'd press his floor button, but he didn't. I glanced over. He didn't move. I told myself not to be paranoid. Maybe he was just deep in thought or tired, like me. But the silence was suffocating. The elevator hummed, crawling upwards. I kept stealing glances at him, wondering why he wasn't pressing a button. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he lived on my floor? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Suddenly, the elevator jolted to a stop. My heart jumped into my throat as the lights flickered. For a second, I was sure we'd be stuck between floors. I looked over at him, expecting some kind of reaction, but he didn't move. He just stood there, as still as before. That's when the panic really started to set in. The elevator resumed, much slower this time. I was counting the seconds until we reached my floor, wondering if I should just get off at the next one. But being alone in a hallway with this guy seemed even worse. I tried to make small talk, break the tension. "Long night?" I asked, my voice shaky. Nothing. He didn't even glance my way. His stillness felt deliberate now, like he was waiting for something. Finally, we reached my floor. I darted out the second the doors opened, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I walked toward my apartment, I heard it, his footsteps, following me. I didn't dare turn around. Maybe he really did live here, I told myself, but every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. The footsteps stayed right behind me, perfectly in sync. I could feel his presence, close but not too close. As I fumbled for my keys, my hands were trembling. I needed to get inside, away from him. The keys slipped from my fingers. I bent down, desperately grabbing them, the footsteps stopping just inches behind me. My pulse was roaring in my ears. I managed to unlock the door and darted inside, slamming it shut. I pressed my ear to the wood, listening. No footsteps, no movement. It was as if he vanished the moment I closed the door. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Maybe I had overreacted. I didn't hear him walk away, but that didn't mean anything. Still, my body was tense, on high alert. I locked the deadbolt, checked it twice. Then, just as I started to relax, I heard it. A faint tapping on the door. It was light at first, barely audible. I froze. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I moved toward the peephole, my hand shaking as I covered the lens with my eye. He was standing there. The stranger. He was facing my door, his head tilted slightly, just staring. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel him watching me through the door. He didn't knock again. He just stood there, waiting. I stepped back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. What did he want? Why hadn't he left? I thought about calling the police, but when I grabbed my phone, I realized it was dead. Of course it was dead. I didn't know what to do. Wait him out? Try to scare him off? My mind raced with options, none of them good. Then, without warning, the knocking returned. This time, hard, insistent. It echoed through the quiet apartment. My chest tightened as I backed away from the door. The knocking continued, relentless, until, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. I stood there, staring at the door, waiting for the next sound, but none came. My legs felt weak. I didn't dare look through the peephole again. What if he was still there? Minutes passed, maybe hours. I lost track of time. My entire body was on edge, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I crept toward the door and peeked through the peephole. He was gone. I exhaled in relief, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I checked the locks again, paced around the apartment, checking the windows. Everything was secure. I sat on the couch trying to convince myself it was over. He must have left. Maybe it was all in my head. But just as I began to relax, the lights flickered and the power went out. I froze. The apartment was pitch black. My heart started racing again, and then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Not outside, but inside the building, echoing through the hall. They were slow, deliberate, getting closer. I didn't dare move. The footsteps stopped, but the silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was thick, heavy, like something waiting to pounce. I never found out who that man was or what he wanted. But since that night, every time I step into that elevator, I feel it again. That creeping sensation that someone is watching, and I know, deep down, I'm not imagining it. The park bench. I never thought something as simple as sitting in a park could turn into the worst experience of my life. I guess you don't expect these things to happen until they do. So here I am, writing this, because I don't know where else to turn. I'm a 28-year-old woman living in the city. My job is pretty stressful, and to unwind, I have this little routine where I stop by a park near my apartment after work. It's nothing special, just a quiet space with a few trees and benches. I like to sit there for 20 minutes or so, just to relax before heading home. It's usually empty around that time, with only a couple of dog walkers or joggers passing by. There's this man, though. He's always sitting across from me, every single day, without fail. I didn't think much of it at first. People use the park all the time, right? But he never seemed to be doing anything, just sitting there, not reading, not on his phone, nothing. I brushed it off, figuring he was just part of the background, but something about it felt off, like he was waiting for something or someone. It started bothering me more when I noticed that he was always there before I arrived and never left before me. One day, I got to the park a little earlier than usual, hoping to have the place to myself. But there he was, already sitting a few benches closer than usual. That's when I realized he wasn't just there by coincidence. I tried to stay calm, convincing myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe he just preferred that bench, but it felt too deliberate, too intentional. I kept my eyes on my book, but I could feel him looking in my direction. Every time I glanced up, he was staring at me. Not in a friendly way either. It was like he was watching, waiting for something. My heart started to race and I thought about leaving early. Just as I stood up to go, he did too. My stomach dropped. I thought he was going to follow me, but instead, he turned and walked in the opposite direction. Even though he didn't approach, the whole thing left me feeling uneasy, like I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, I decided to go even earlier, thinking maybe I could avoid him. But when I got to the park, he was already there again. This time, he was sitting on the bench right next to mine. My heart skipped a beat. It was too close, closer than I was comfortable with. I tried to act like it didn't bother me, but I couldn't stay. I made up some excuse to myself about being tired and left after just a few minutes. As I walked away, I felt his eyes on my back the entire time. I didn't dare look back. The fear was crawling up my spine, but I kept telling myself that I was being paranoid. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time I left work, I'd check over my shoulder, wondering if he was following me. I hadn't seen him outside of the park, but I was starting to get paranoid. I even avoided the park for a while, but that didn't make the anxiety go away. One evening, I took a different route home, trying to clear my head. I thought I was safe, but as I turned the corner near my apartment, I saw him. He was standing across the street, staring at me. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, watching. I froze. Then, without thinking, I rushed into my building, my heart pounding in my chest. Once inside, I locked the door and stood there, trying to catch my breath. It couldn't be a coincidence anymore. He wasn't just in the park, he was following me now. I couldn't deny it. I stopped going to the park entirely after that, but it didn't help. He started appearing in other places, outside the grocery store, near my gym, even on the street close to my office. It was like no matter where I went, he was there, always at a distance, but close enough to make sure I noticed him. I told myself I was overreacting. What could I even do? He hadn't done anything wrong. It wasn't like I could go to the police with a story about some guy sitting on a bench. I mentioned it to a friend once, and she told me I should report it, but it felt so pointless. I couldn't explain why it terrified me so much. It just did. One night, I was walking home from the subway, glancing over my shoulder the whole way. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. My pulse was racing, and my hands were sweating. And then, I saw him. He was standing right outside my building, leaning casually against the wall as if he'd been waiting for me. I froze in place. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding in my ears, and all I could think was, he knows where I live. I bolted into my building, slamming the door behind me and fumbling with my keys. I locked myself inside my apartment, shaking. I looked out the window, half expecting him to be gone, but he was still there, staring up at me. For the next few days, I didn't leave my apartment. I called in sick to work and avoided going outside at all. Every time I looked out the window or checked the peephole, I expected to see him standing there, but he didn't show up, not once. I started to relax, thinking maybe he'd finally given up. Maybe it was over. But then, a note appeared under my door. It was just one word written in neat handwriting. Soon. I haven't left my apartment in days. I've thought about moving, but I'm not sure it would help. It feels like no matter where I go, he'll find me. I'm writing this because I don't know what to do anymore. I'm terrified, and I don't feel safe. Just before I started typing this, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. I don't want to look through the peephole. What if it's him? I'm still not entirely sure what happened that night, and I haven't driven alone at night since. It's been months, but I keep replaying it in my head, wondering if I overreacted or if something much worse almost happened. It started as a normal weekend. I was visiting some friends from college who live a few hours away. We had a great time, and I ended up staying later than I planned. By the time I left, it was well past midnight. The highway was almost deserted, just me and the occasional semi-truck passing by. The road was surrounded by thick woods on either side, and as the night wore on, it became quieter and quieter, except for the hum of my car's engine. I'd been driving for about an hour when I noticed my fuel was low. I hadn't realized how far apart gas stations were on that stretch of road. The next exit sign promised a gas station, and with a slight sense of relief, I turned off. As soon as I saw the gas station, something felt off. The lights were flickering, and there were no other cars around. I tried to brush it off. It was late after all. Of course, it would be quiet. I pulled up to the pump and got out of the car, feeling the cool night air settle around me. That's when I noticed something strange. There was no sound. No crickets, no wind rustling the trees, just silence. The door to the gas station creaked open, and a man stepped out. He was wearing an old, faded uniform, but his expression was what unsettled me. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Need some gas?" he asked, his voice too cheerful for the eerie setting. "Yeah, just filling up," I replied, already feeling a bit uneasy. He walked over, slowly, and before I could stop him, he began checking my tires. "These look a little low," he said, squatting down as if he had all the time in the world. I stood there, awkwardly, not sure what to say. It was a self-serve station and I could have done it myself, but he didn't seem in a hurry to let me. "Where you headed?" he asked, still fiddling with my tires. "Just driving home," I said quickly, trying not to reveal too much. "Long way to go," he said, glancing up at me. His eyes were too intense, like he was studying me. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just want to get there before it gets too late." He took his time, much longer than necessary. Something about the way he was stalling made me feel exposed, vulnerable. I glanced at the pump. He hadn't even started filling my tank. Suddenly, I felt like I needed to leave. Now, I thanked him quickly, almost stumbling over my words, and hurried back to the driver's seat. As I pulled out, my heart was racing. It wasn't until I was back on the highway that I glanced down and realized the fuel gauge hadn't moved. He hadn't pumped any gas. My mind started racing. Had he done that on purpose? Was I just being paranoid? I didn't have much time to think because that's when I noticed the headlights, far behind me, in the distance. At first I didn't think much of it, but then the lights turned off. I glanced back, straining to see if the car was still there. My heart skipped a beat. It was. I could just barely make out a shadowy figure of the vehicle, trailing me with no lights on. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I was just imagining things. But as I sped up, so did the car behind me. My stomach dropped. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I saw nothing but darkness. And then, a flash. The headlights turned on again just for a moment before disappearing. I hit the gas. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and my eyes darted between the road and the rearview mirror. The road was getting more isolated, more desolate. The trees seemed to close in, and the darkness felt thicker, heavier. I considered pulling into a rest stop, but the thought of stopping sent a wave of panic through me. What if they followed me there? In a split-second decision, I turned down a narrow, unmarked road, hoping I could lose them. The road was bumpy and winding, with no streetlights in sight. My breath was coming in short, quick gasps. I kept checking the mirror, praying the car wasn't behind me. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. But then, far in the distance, the headlights appeared again, closer this time. I pushed the pedal to the floor, swerving around the tight curves, my tires skidding on the gravel. My phone had no service, and I was completely alone. No one knew where I was. I felt trapped, like I'd driven myself into a corner. Every noise from my car seemed louder, every shadow more threatening. The fear was suffocating. Finally, I reached a clearing. The road opened up into an empty field, and I pulled over, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked around, desperate for any sign of the car, but it was gone. There was nothing, just the vast emptiness and the deafening silence. For a few minutes, I sat there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My mind was racing, telling me that I'd imagined it all, but the fear wouldn't leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I got back on the road, driving slowly now, but every few minutes I checked the rearview mirror, expecting to see those headlights again. Even though I never did, I couldn't relax. I finally made it back to a more populated area and stopped at another gas station, one that was brightly lit with other cars around. I filled up quickly, my eyes darting around the whole time, but no one seemed to notice me. Back on the highway, I still couldn't shake the dread. Every time a car came up behind me, I held my breath, waiting for the headlights to disappear. They never did, but the fear stuck with me. Even now, I can't drive at night without feeling like someone's watching me. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I didn't. But I can't shake the feeling that if I hadn't driven off that night, something terrible would have happened. I've lived alone in my apartment for a little over a year. It's a quiet, modest place in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it's been home. My routine is pretty predictable. Work, come home, maybe watch a little TV, and then sleep. For the most part, things had been fine. But a few months ago, I started noticing little things that made me uncomfortable. At first, it was easy to brush off. I'd come home and notice small things out of place. A chair slightly moved from the table, the blanket on my bed looking just a little more crumpled than I remembered. At the time, I figured I was just being forgetful. After all, I'm human, right? But then, one night, I saw something that shook me. I found a mug by the sink that I hadn't used in days. I'm not a neat freak, but I'm certain I didn't leave it there. It was like someone else had been in my apartment, but the door had been locked and nothing was missing. I tried to ignore it, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. Things escalated quickly after that. One night, I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed the photo frame on my desk had shifted, just a little, but enough for me to notice. Then there was this faint smell, something unfamiliar, like an old, musty odor. I had no idea where it was coming from, but it didn't belong in my apartment. My heart started racing, and that's when I knew I couldn't brush this off anymore. I went out the next day and bought a couple of cheap security cameras. I thought maybe I was just overreacting, but I needed to be sure. I set them up around the apartment, one near the front door and another in my bedroom. For the next few days, I kept checking the footage, hoping to find nothing. And for a while, that's exactly what I got. Nothing. No one came in or out, nothing moved when I wasn't home. It was starting to make me feel like I was losing my mind. But then, one night, while lying in bed, I heard it, breathing. Slow, steady breathing coming from the walls. I froze, not even daring to move. I strained my ears, trying to convince myself it was just in my head, but no, it was there. Faint, but unmistakable. My stomach dropped. I thought maybe it was just the pipes or the neighbors, but it felt too real, too close. Panicked, I called the police. They came, did a quick check of the apartment, and of course found nothing. They said it was probably just anxiety from living alone, that it happens to people sometimes. I didn't believe them, but what could I do? They didn't find any signs of forced entry, so they left, telling me to try and relax. Easier said than done. I tried to talk to a few friends about it, but they didn't seem to take me seriously either. "You're probably just stressed," they'd say. Or, "Maybe it's just the building settling." But I knew what I heard. I started locking my bedroom door every night, something I never used to do. Still, the feeling of unease crept back. Things kept going wrong. Food in the fridge that I didn't eat. Lights left on when I knew I'd turned them off. I felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't prove it. A few nights later, the breathing came back. This time, it was louder, closer. It was definitely coming from the wall behind my bed. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, and pressed my ear against the wall. There it was again, deep and steady. Someone was there. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I spent the next day going over every inch of my apartment, looking for something, anything that could explain what was happening. And then I noticed it. The mirror in my bedroom, the one that had been there since I moved in, was slightly off-center. I don't know why, but something about it just felt wrong. I grabbed the edge of it and pulled, and that's when I felt a cold draft from behind. Behind the mirror was a small, hidden door. My hands were shaking, but I pulled the door open. It led to a narrow crawl space, barely wide enough for a person to fit through. I crawled in, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw it. A filthy mattress covered in old, crumpled sheets, food wrappers scattered around, and clothes, dirty, worn clothes that weren't mine. Someone had been living here, in my walls. My mind was racing, piecing together every strange thing that had happened. The breathing, the moved objects, the food in my fridge. They weren't just in my head. Someone had been in my apartment, living inside the walls, and I hadn't known for months. As I stood there, frozen, I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Someone was coming back. I scrambled out of the crawl space, slamming the hidden door shut. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely lock the bedroom door behind me. I collapsed onto the floor, my back pressed against the door, trying to catch my breath. My phone was on the bed, but I couldn't move to reach it. I just sat there, trembling, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. I wanted to call the police again, but what if they didn't believe me this time? What if they came, and whoever it was disappeared again? My mind was spinning, and I felt trapped, not just in my apartment, but in my own fear. And then I heard it again, the breathing. But this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from inside the room. The Hitchhiker. I wasn't planning on writing this, but after everything that happened, I feel like I need to get it out there. Maybe sharing this will make me feel less paranoid. I drive a lot for work, sometimes late into the night. I live in a pretty rural area, so it's normal for me to be on long, empty roads for hours. Last week, I had a job that required me to drive late. It was just like any other night, quiet, no cars around. But that's how it always starts, right? I'm not the kind of person who picks up hitchhikers. You hear too many stories, and honestly, I just don't trust strangers. But that night, I saw this guy standing by the side of the road. He was alone, wearing a hoodie, and it was freezing. I felt bad for him, just standing there in the dark, so I stopped. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. The road was deserted, and part of me thought maybe I'd want someone to help if I were in his shoes. So, I let him in. I should have just kept driving. From the moment he got in, something felt off. He smiled at me, but it didn't seem natural, like it was too forced. I tried to make some small talk to ease the awkwardness. You know, asking where he was headed, how long he'd been out there. But instead of answering, he started asking me questions. Where are you going? Are you meeting anyone? He asked if I lived alone, if I had a family waiting for me. I felt my stomach drop. He wasn't asking these questions like someone who was just curious. There was something wrong about the way he kept steering the conversation back to me. I started to feel trapped in my own car. His voice was calm, casual even, but the things he said weren't. He started talking about how this area wasn't safe. He said people had gone missing on this road before. It was like he was sharing random facts, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was trying to scare me. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if he was messing with me or if there was some truth to what he was saying. Every word he spoke felt heavier, darker. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you have anyone waiting for you at home?" That question hit me hard. I didn't answer right away. Something about the way he asked it made my skin crawl. I laughed nervously and said something about needing to drop him off soon, but he ignored it. Instead, he told me I could drive a bit further and drop him at a better spot ahead. He seemed to know the area better than me, which made things worse. How did he know these roads so well? I was sweating by this point. My heart was pounding. I couldn't show him how scared I was. I told him I needed to stop for gas, hoping that would be enough to get him out of the car. But when we pulled up to the station, he didn't move. He just sat there, watching me. I got out of the car to fill up the tank, hoping that when I got back, he'd be gone. But when I returned, he was still sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. I tried to stay calm, told him this was as far as I could take him. That's when he smiled again, that same forced, eerie smile, and said, "It's been nice knowing you." My heart nearly stopped. What the hell did he mean by that? I didn't ask, I just wanted him out of my car. And finally, he got out. He walked off into the dark without looking back, disappearing into the night. I drove off as fast as I could, not even bothering to look in the rearview mirror. For the rest of the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His face, his questions, the way he talked about people going missing. My hands were shaking the whole way back. When I got home, I locked all the doors, checked the windows, and didn't sleep that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, that he knew something about me I didn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see his face. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it was just a weird encounter. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was safe now. But every time I saw someone walking on the side of the road, I tensed up, half expecting it to be him. I couldn't help it. The feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I kept checking the locks, looking out the window, waiting for something to happen. Then, a week later, I turned on the TV, and there he was. His face was on the news. My stomach dropped. They said he was connected to multiple disappearances. I froze. I could hardly breathe. I didn't catch all the details, but they were talking about bodies found not far from the stretch of road where I had picked him up. The reporters were asking if anyone had seen him recently. I haven't told anyone what happened. Part of me is still in shock. I don't know if he recognized me that night or if he even remembers me at all. But I can't stop thinking about what he said before he left. "It's been nice knowing you." Those words keep playing over and over in my head. I don't know if I'm being paranoid, but I feel like it's not over. Like he's still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. And I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I've never really been a paranoid person, or at least I didn't used to be. I'm a 29-year-old woman living in a big city, and like a lot of people here, I rely on the subway to get around. I work late sometimes, and it's not unusual for me to catch the last train home. The routine became second nature. Headphones in, eyes on my phone, zone out for the ride. Lately, though, I'd started to feel watched. It sounds ridiculous, I know. Maybe it was all the stories you hear about public transportation, weird people, close calls, you name it. But still, I brushed it off. I figured I was just letting my imagination run wild. It's not like anything had actually happened. That was until last week. It was one of those late nights again. I was exhausted and just wanted to get home. When I got on the subway, the car was nearly empty. There was a guy slumped over in one of the corner seats. He looked like he was asleep, or maybe drunk. I didn't think much of it at first. It's not like that's an unusual sight on the subway, but something felt off. I sat down a few seats away, trying not to stare, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. The train rattled on, but he didn't move, not even a shift. His head was hanging at an odd angle, and as we passed stop after stop, I started feeling this growing sense of unease. Shouldn't he have woken up by now? I kept glancing at him, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. He was probably just really tired, right? But the longer I watched him, the more something inside me screamed that something was wrong. We were a few stops away from mine when I finally decided to check on him. I walked over, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking. No response. I reached out, hesitated for a second, then tapped his shoulder. His skin was cold. I pulled my hand back immediately, heart racing. "Hey!" I called again, louder this time, shaking him a little harder. Still nothing. My throat tightened as panic started to settle in. I looked around, but there was no one else in the car. My stop was coming up, and I had no idea what to do. I ran to the emergency intercom and pushed the button, trying to explain what was happening. The train slowed down as we pulled into the next station. I kept glancing back at the man, expecting him to move or wake up, but he didn't. When the doors opened, a couple of workers came on board. I rushed to them, pointing at the man. "He's not moving. I think something's wrong with him." But when we turned back toward the seat, he was gone. The seat was empty, completely empty. No sign that anyone had even been sitting there. I stood there, dumbfounded. "He was just there," I stammered. "I swear he was right there." The workers exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. "Miss, are you sure you saw someone? These late-night shifts can mess with your head." I wanted to argue, to insist that I wasn't crazy, but what could I say? He was gone. The workers shrugged it off, telling me to go home and rest. But as I left the station, my skin was crawling. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced that someone was watching me. The next few days were awful. I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I started triple-checking the locks on my apartment door. Every creak, every shadow sent my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The rational part of me kept saying it was nothing. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe the guy had gotten off at the stop without me noticing. But then things started happening. Little things at first. My front door would be unlocked when I was sure I had locked it. I'd hear footsteps behind me when I walked home, but when I turned around, there was no one there. One night, I woke up to the sound of my door creaking open. I rushed out of bed, but the door was shut tight. Nothing was there. I even went back to the subway authorities, desperate for some explanation. I described the man again, but they just brushed me off. They said it was probably my imagination, that no one had reported anything unusual. A few days later, I saw him again, or at least I thought I did. I was walking home late at night, and there, across the street, was the same man, standing completely still, watching me. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, staring at him. But when I blinked, he was gone. I rushed home, locked every door, and sat in my living room, too afraid to move. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I got a call from the subway authorities. They told me they had finally found something. A worker had passed out on the train from exhaustion the same night I had seen the man. He had been taken off the train quietly, and that's why there had been no sign of him. It was all real, but the explanation didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. Sure, I wasn't imagining the man, but the fear still lingered. Every sound in my apartment felt like a threat. Every shadow made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching me. Tonight, I'm sitting here, trying to calm my nerves, when I hear it. A knock. Quiet, but deliberate. I freeze. I know better than to check. I never thought I'd be the type of person to share something like this, but I guess I need to get it off my chest. It's been over a year now, but the fear hasn't really gone away. If anything, it's gotten worse. Like most teenagers, I spent way too much time online. Between school and homework, I'd spend hours scrolling through social media apps, chatting with friends, and sometimes connecting with new people. During the pandemic, it was my main way to feel close to anyone. I wasn't dumb about it. I knew all the warnings about online strangers, but I guess I always thought I was careful. I followed the usual rules like not sharing personal details or accepting requests from people I didn't know. I noticed a few weird things here and there, like some followers who didn't seem to post anything or the occasional stranger who would DM me something random, but I always blocked them. The thing is, nothing bad ever happens in my neighborhood. I live in one of those quiet suburbs where the biggest news is someone's dog getting loose. It felt safe, you know? Then I got a friend request from a guy who looked normal enough. He had mutual friends with me, and he seemed like the kind of person I'd get along with. We started chatting. At first, it was just about the usual stuff, music, shows we liked, and random memes. He seemed funny, and I was glad to have someone new to talk to. A few days into chatting, though, things got weird. He started asking more personal questions. At first, it was about what school I went to, which I dodged. Then he asked about my daily routine, like what time I usually got home from school or where I lived. It felt off, but I convinced myself it was normal small talk. But then he asked for a photo of my house. My stomach dropped. That's when I knew something was really wrong. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked him right away. I felt a huge wave of relief wash over me, thinking that was the end of it. Then, a day later, I got a message from a different account. "Why'd you block me?" I stared at my screen, my heart racing. How did he find me again? I blocked that account too and decided to delete the app for a while. I tried to forget about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. A few days later, while I was walking home from school, I noticed a man standing near the corner. I'd never seen him before, but something about him made me feel uneasy. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, but he seemed too still, too focused. The next day, he was there again, only this time, he was closer. I kept my head down and walked faster, my skin crawling with fear. I told my parents about it, but they brushed it off. "You're imagining things," my mom said. "It's probably just someone who lives nearby." But I knew he didn't belong there. And then one day, he finally approached me. I had just turned the corner toward my street when he stepped out from behind a tree. He smiled, and my heart nearly stopped when he said, "I know you from the app." I didn't wait to hear anything else. I bolted, running as fast as I could toward my house. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking every bolt and latch. I was shaking so badly I could barely breathe. I called the police, but they didn't take it seriously. We can't do anything unless he's made a threat or broken the law, they told me. I felt helpless. No one was taking me seriously, and I was the only one who knew how real the danger was. Every day after that, I saw him somewhere. Sometimes he was across the street, sometimes just a shadow in the distance, but I knew it was him. He started sending me messages again, new accounts, new names, but always him. The messages were short, always terrifying. I'm watching you. I saw you today. Once he sent a photo of me walking home, taken from far away. I deleted every app, but it didn't matter. He still found me. I stopped leaving the house unless I absolutely had to. Every creak of the floorboards, every flash of movement outside made me jump. My friends thought I was paranoid, but they didn't understand. The fear was like a constant weight pressing down on my chest. One day, I saw him standing outside, right under a streetlight. He was smiling, watching me. I snapped. I stormed outside, screaming for him to leave me alone, to get out of my life. He didn't flinch. He just smiled wider and said, "We're friends, remember?" That's when I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but I was gasping for air by the time I got back to my house. I locked myself inside and didn't come out for days. We moved a few months later. My parents finally realized how serious it was when they found out about the messages and the photo. They figured moving to a new neighborhood would solve the problem. And for a while, it worked. I deleted all my social media, changed my phone number, and tried to start over. But the fear didn't go away. Every time I saw a man standing alone, I wondered if it was him. It's been weeks since I've seen anyone who looks like him, but that doesn't mean the fear has disappeared. I still feel him, somehow, waiting, watching. Then, just yesterday, I left the house to walk to the store. As I turned the corner, I saw someone, standing in the distance, just watching. It could have been anyone, but I swear it looked like him. I don't know if he'll ever find me again. I hope he won't, but I can't shake the feeling that one day he might. Does anyone else know what this feels like? The locked window. It feels weird writing this down, but I need to get it out. My husband keeps telling me it was just a bad dream, but I know what I saw. We moved into this house 6 months ago. It's an old place, not too big, in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of house you'd picture having kids in, you know? It was cheap because it needed some work, but we were ready for that. I fell in love with it immediately. The creaky floors, the old-fashioned windows. It felt cozy. But there was this one window in our bedroom that wouldn't lock. At first, it seemed like no big deal. My husband, Alex, brushed it off, saying he'd fix it later. But weeks went by, and he never got around to it. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The first few nights I heard noises, creaks and groans. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses do that, right? But something felt off, especially about that window. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and swear it was open a crack, even though I knew I'd shut it before bed. One night, I woke up to a soft creak. It sounded like the window. I lay there, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling. I nudged Alex awake, whispering that I thought someone was opening the window. He mumbled that I was imagining things, that the house was old and noisy. I tried to believe him, but my gut told me something was wrong. In the mornings, I'd check the window, and it would always be slightly open. I wedged a piece of wood in there to keep it shut, but still, it would be ajar by morning. That's when I started locking our bedroom door at night. I'd wake up several times, checking the door, checking the window. Every creak made my skin crawl. I even thought about calling someone to fix the lock, but we had other things to pay for. New appliances, painting the walls. The window could wait, I told myself. I was just being paranoid. Then one morning, I found the piece of wood I'd wedged in the window lying on the floor. Alex insisted I must have knocked it loose, but I knew I hadn't touched it. I started sleeping worse. Every night I woke up feeling like something was watching us. I'd sit up in bed, staring at the window. I even thought I heard footsteps outside our room one night, but when I looked out, nothing was there. Alex was getting frustrated, saying I needed to relax, that I was making things up. I couldn't help it. I started double checking every lock in the house before bed. I knew it was driving Alex crazy, but I couldn't stop. I spent hours online searching for break-ins in our neighborhood, but there wasn't anything. No reports, no strange activity. It didn't make sense. I felt like I was going insane. Then, one night, when Alex was working late, I heard the window open again. I froze, too scared to move. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and locked myself in the bathroom. I stayed there for what felt like hours, listening for any sound, but everything was quiet. The worst part came a few nights later. I woke up again, that familiar creaking sound pulling me out of sleep. But this time, it wasn't just the window. I could feel it. Someone was in the room. My heart was racing, and I forced myself to open my eyes. That's when I saw him. A man, standing at the foot of the bed, just watching us. I couldn't breathe. My whole body felt frozen. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring. His face was in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on me. I wanted to scream, to wake Alex, but I couldn't make a sound. I lay there, paralyzed, waiting for him to do something. But he didn't. He just watched. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he slipped out of the room. The door didn't even make a sound. I shook Alex awake, practically sobbing. I told him there was a man in the room. He jumped out of bed, grabbed a bat from the closet, and searched the entire house. But the man was gone. The only thing we found was the window wide open. Alex tried to calm me down, saying it was a nightmare, that I was seeing things. But I know what I saw. The police came the next day, but there was no sign of forced entry, no fingerprints. They said maybe it was a vivid dream or stress. They were polite, but I could tell they didn't believe me. The window is fixed now. Alex finally called someone to replace the lock. But it doesn't matter. I don't feel safe here anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see him standing there, watching us. Even during the day, I can't shake the feeling that someone's been inside the house. I'm always on edge, jumping at every sound. And the worst part? Even with the window fixed, I still hear it. That faint creak in the middle of the night. Every time, I tell myself it's just the wind or the house shifting. But deep down, I know it's not. I know he's still out there. And one night, I'm afraid I'll open my eyes and see him again. Only this time, I don't think he'll just stand there. So, yeah, I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. My husband doesn't believe me. The police don't believe me. But I know what I saw, and I don't think it's over. The Night Jogger. I've always been a night jogger. There's something about the quiet, empty streets that calms me after a long day. No distractions, no noise, just me and the sound of my feet hitting the pavement. I live in a pretty safe neighborhood, so I've never felt nervous running at night. If anything, the solitude is what I look forward to the most. Lately, though, I've noticed a few things that have made me uneasy. A few nights ago, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned around, but the street was empty. No one was there, so I brushed it off. Another time, I saw a parked car with its headlights off. I glanced at it as I ran by and thought I saw someone sitting inside. But again, nothing happened. The car didn't move, and I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence. But then, last week, something happened that I can't shake. It started as a regular run. The air was cool, and the streets were quiet, just like I liked them. I was about 10 minutes into my usual route when I noticed a car in the distance. It was moving slowly, maybe just creeping along. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they were lost or looking for an address. But after I turned onto another street, the car turned too. That's when I started feeling uneasy. I kept jogging, picking up the pace a bit, hoping the car would continue on its way. But every time I changed direction, the car followed. My heart started pounding, not from the run, but from fear. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but something felt wrong. I could feel my hands getting clammy, and my stomach tightened. This wasn't just some random driver, they were following me. I turned onto a side street, hoping to lose them. For a few seconds, I thought it worked. I couldn't hear the car anymore, and when I glanced back, the street was empty. Relief washed over me, and I slowed down. But as I turned another corner, there it was again, slowly rounding the bend behind me. The headlights were still off, and my heart jumped into my throat. I panicked. I sprinted toward a nearby alley, diving into the narrow space between two buildings. My breath was ragged, and my legs burned from the sudden burst of speed. I crouched behind a dumpster, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't hear the car anymore, but I wasn't about to take any chances. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, listening for any sound that might give away their presence. Nothing. I cautiously peered out from behind the dumpster. The street was empty. Maybe the car had finally driven off. I convinced myself that I was safe, that it was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe I had overreacted. I slowly made my way out of the alley and back onto the main road, keeping an eye out for any sign of the car. I was a few blocks from home, feeling a little more secure with each step, but as I turned onto my street, my blood ran cold. The car was parked a block away, engine idling, headlights still off. I stood there, frozen in place. They hadn't just followed me, they knew where I lived. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go home. What if they followed me inside? What if they were waiting for the right moment to make a move? My mind raced through every possibility. Should I run again? Should I confront them? My legs felt like lead, and my body refused to move. I didn't want to show how terrified I was, but every instinct screamed at me to get away. After what felt like an eternity, I started walking toward my house, trying to act like everything was fine. Each step was torture, pulling me closer to the car, closer to the unknown danger inside. My eyes flicked to the car every few seconds, waiting for it to lurch forward, for the driver to make their move. But they didn't. The car just sat there, like it was watching me. I was almost at my front door when the car finally pulled away, rolling slowly down the street before disappearing around the corner. I stood there, keys in hand, not sure if I should feel relieved or more terrified. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me and leaning against it, trying to calm my frenzied mind. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the deadbolt, my chest still tight from the panic. But the worst part? I knew they'd be back. Whoever they weren't done. This wasn't just a one-time thing. I peeked out the window an hour later, and there it was again, parked a block away, headlights off, watching. The next few days were a blur. I tried to go about my life like normal, but everything felt wrong. I avoided jogging at night, but even during the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I saw a car in the distance, my heart would race. I'd catch glimpses of shadows moving in my peripheral vision, and every distant engine sounded like that car. I didn't see it for a few days, but the feeling never left. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house jolted me awake. My mind was consumed with the thought of them, whoever they were, coming back. And then, last night, I heard the engine again. I didn't even need to look. I knew they were back. Now, I'm sitting here, writing this because I don't know what else to do. I've thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I haven't seen anyone. I haven't been threatened. It's just a car, right? But I can't shake the feeling that I'm not safe anymore. Hold on. I think I just heard something outside. I need to go.